So unless you've been living under a rock, you would know that James Gunn a little over 2 years ago announced 10 projects from the first chapter of his new rebooted DC Universe titled Gods and Monsters. And one of the most anticipated projects on that slate for DC fans is none other than Lanterns. However, there are some major question marks on the direction of this show for a multitude of reasons. We are the It's actually just K this time, but in this video, I'll be going over everything we know about Lanterns so far and what that could potentially mean for the series, but also for the Lantern side of the DCU. So as many of us already know, the brief synopsis that we have for Lantern so far is that we have new recruit John Stewart and Lantern legend Hal Jordan, who are two intergalactic cops drawn into a Earth-based mystery as they investigate a murder in the American heartland, and this is also supposed to be tying into the larger overarching story of the DCU said by James Gunn many times. Now right off the bat, based on that synopsis alone, the show sounds really good. Like, I'm excited to see what they are investigating and how it ties into everything going on in DCU, and I was also really excited that they decided to include both Hal and John rather than just picking Hal or John individually, because of the fact that Hal Jordan and John Stewart both have large fandoms. And then we started getting casting news about this show, and boy did they take a step in a direction that I did not think that they were going to do at all. So far for the main cast, we have Kyle Chandler as Hal Jordan and Aaron Pierre as John Stewart. Peak casting for John Stewart, by the way. We have Kelly MacDonald casted as Sheriff Carey, who's described as a no-nonsense woman deeply devoted to her family and close-knit town. Her resilience, shaped by a complex past that hardened her resolve, anchors her when the community's secrets begin to surface. Then we have Garrett Dillahunt, who is cast as modern cowboy William Macon, a self-righteous, conspiracy-minded man who masks his ruthless ambition behind a charming and calculated facade. We then have Ulrich Thompson casted as the GOAT Hal Jordan villain Sinestro. Lastly, we have Purna Jagannathan casted as Zoe, sorry if I butchered that last name, who is described as effortlessly confident and poised in any setting, even those where she stands out. She is every bit as composed and cunning of the influential men around her. And she's also rumored to be the love interest for John Stewart. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to my first issue / question mark with this show, and that issue is, why in the blue hell was Hal Jordan casted as a 60-year-old man for this series? Now guys, I just want to preface this by saying I'm a fan of everything that James Gunn has been doing so far with the DCU, but this is the one thing that he has done, or that Tom King or whoever's involved with this show has done, that has genuinely concerned me and still doesn't make sense to me to this day. Now, I know what a lot of you guys are going to say in the comments. Oh, okay, this is supposed to be a show about Hal Jordan, who's a Lantern legend already. That's why he's 60 years old. And my response to that would be, they didn't have to make Hal Jordan 60 for him to be a Lantern legend. In the comics, Hal Jordan becomes a Green Lantern in his mid-20s. He could have easily had a 10-year career and been considered a legend at the age of 35. They did not have to make Hal Jordan a 60-year-old man to push the narrative of him being a legend. And again, he still could have been the veteran Lantern in comparison to John, because if Hal's been there for 10 years and John is the new recruit and John is 30, John's still the new recruit, Hal's still the legend. He's been there for 10 years, but he's 35 and John's 30. It's way better. But the main reason why this is such a bad move, in my opinion, is because it ruins a lot of the great dynamics that Hal Jordan has in the comics. For example, his relationship with characters like Oliver Queen and Barry Allen. Those are characters that are his best friends, and those characters are supposed to be in their early to mid 30s. You could argue Oliver's pushing 40 or maybe early 40s, but they're relatively young. Hal Jordan being this old either means that A, he's not going to be as close with them as he is in the comics, or B, they're also going to be pushing fucking 60 or in their 50s, which is ass. And guys, I'm not saying that it's impossible for a 6-year-old Hal Jordan to be friends with Oliver Queen or Barry Allen, even though they're younger than him, but it just makes a lot more sense for them to be around the same age and have that brotherly dynamic they have in the comics, rather than them be 20 to 30 years apart and Hal be the fucking unk of the group. Another downside of Hal being this old is that this probably means we're going to miss a lot of his character development in early years as being a Lantern. And sure, you can make the argument that we may get prequel projects for Hal Jordan in the future that showcase his early years, but then we'd still be missing out on things like him being on the Justice League, him interacting with characters like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc., etc. All of these things completely get annihilated by making Hal Jordan this old, and honestly, I just don't think that this was the smartest decision, especially considering the hell that Hal Jordan fans have been through since Green Lantern 2011. The first thing you're going to do when you bring him back attack is make him a 60-year-old man and not even have him be a big part of the DCU for the entire future of it. I personally just don't see how this makes logical sense, especially considering the fact that Hal Jordan is the most prominent and popular Lantern of them all. By doing this, you essentially alienate half of the entire Green Lantern fan base. And for a universe that's restarting and finally bringing the Lanterns back into live action, I just don't feel like that's a smart move at all. Now, if you're a Hal Jordan fan like me, you're probably sick about this information, but make sure to watch this entire video because I do have a theory that could potentially salvage the travesty of Hal Jordan being 60 years old and actually make logical sense and fit into the story of the DCU. My next issue with this show is that I don't think that John Stewart being the main Lantern for Lantern storytelling in the larger DCU makes sense. Now, just to clarify what I mean by this, I'm not saying that John Stewart shouldn't have a prominent role in the DCU. In fact, I think that John Stewart should remain the main Lantern for the Justice League. However, I do not think that John Stewart should be the main Lantern when it comes to telling Lantern stories in the DCU. And to be quite honest with you, it's because John Stewart in comics doesn't really have that many compelling stories, and John Stewart's popularity is largely due to the fact that he was the main Green Lantern in Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. Now, obviously media is subjective, but it is objective that Hal Jordan is just the better performing Lantern when it comes to comics and storytelling. The fans just consistently buy and read more Hal Jordan comics, and that should tell us something. Now, the reason why this is an issue for the DCU is assuming Hal Jordan is going to be the old Lantern and he's eventually going to retire or pass the mantle on to John, or even worse, die. That now means that they have to tell stories with John Stewart as the main Lantern, which means if they ever want to adapt popular Green Lantern stories like Blackest Night, War of the Green Lanterns, or Sinestro Corps War, it'd essentially be stealing Hal Jordan stories and just slapping them onto John Stewart, which A, is lazy storytelling and something that fans will be able to see from a mile away, and B, just brings me back to my initial issue, which is why do you want to get rid of Hal Jordan if you're just going to tell his stories anyway? And not only is this a disservice to Hal Jordan, but it's also a disservice to John Stewart because you're just taking another popular character's stories and giving it to John Stewart because he doesn't have any interesting stories himself, rather than trying to create something original and new for John Stewart to make people want to go read his comics, which, by the way, is something they could have done anyway with Hal Jordan still being the main Lantern of this universe. Now, again, I could be completely wrong, and they could in fact be planning on doing something original for John Stewart's stories in the DCU. However, all the iconic stories from the comics that people would want to see in live action, such as Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run, will just not be happening because those are all Hal Jordan centric stories. And the sad reality is all of the good Green Lantern stories are Hal Jordan centric stories, so getting rid of him so early on in the DCU just, again, doesn't make sense. Now, some may argue that they could just explore Kyle Rayner stories in the DCU, but again, the problem with exploring Kyle Rayner is because his whole purpose was to replace Hal Jordan after he turned evil and became Parallax Hal Jordan. This also just gives us the same issue we have with John Stewart, which is the fact that they would then just have to give Kyle Rayner Hal Jordan stories because Kyle Rayner also doesn't have any Lantern stories where he's the main Lantern. And again, just to clarify, when I say Lantern stories, I mean Lantern stories that are huge events in the DC universe or just stories that involve the entire Corps. Now that I've covered all the concerns with Lanterns, let's go over how they could actually save Lanterns and save Hal Jordan in the DCU if my theory that I'm about to tell you is true. And just a quick side note, this theory could 100% just be me coping with the fact that Hal Jordan may be cooked in this universe, but there is a lot of evidence supporting this theory, and I will be using everything that we've heard about the DCU so far and everything that James Gunn has teased about the DCU so far that we haven't actually seen. Now that that's out of the way, let's get right into the theory. So first things first, there are two major things that I want you guys to keep in the back of your mind while I'm explaining this theory, and it'll help this theory to make a lot more sense. The first thing being that James Gunn has outright confirmed that the New Frontier has a big influence on the stories that are being told at DC Studios. More on why this is important in a minute. But the second major thing I want you to pay attention to is how James Gunn describes the plot of Lanterns.
Watching over Precinct Earth. In it, they discover a terrifying mystery that ties into our larger story of the DCU.
Now, like I said, keep both of those things in the back of your mind. But since the release of that initial slate reveal, we've not only gotten Creature Commandos, but we've also got a full trailer for Superman and a bunch of other tidbits and information on the DCU as a whole. One of the major things that we can tell about the DCU so far, based off of everything that we've gotten, is that the world of superheroes in the DCU as it stands is a complete mess. Going into this universe, we already knew that this was a world where heroes have existed for a long time and that metahumans were already around, but the degree of this is showcased in Creature Commandos when in Pacolistan, LeBri gets into a fight with two random ass metahumans. We also find out in set leaks of Superman that heroes are basically corporate funded or being controlled by corporate entities. And then of course we have our normal upstanding outstanding superheroes like Superman. In short, there's really no unification at this point in the DCU. There's just a bunch of superpowered beings just running rampant. And this, ladies and gentlemen, brings us back to the New Frontier. Now, for those of you who don't know, in the New Frontier, the world is in a similar state. Obviously, some superheroes are friends like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, but there's no real unity. There's no Justice League at this point in time. Heroes are doing their own thing. Heroes are vigilantes, the government is after heroes, they don't really trust the heroes, and everyone has their sort of own faction. And in this story, Superman is a major catalyst to getting all the heroes of the world to come together. Another major hero that has a prominent role in this story is none other than Hal Jordan himself. Now obviously this story's Hal Jordan is a lot different than the Hal Jordan we're getting in the DCU because of the fact that in this story, it's pretty much his origin story, and in the DCU, he's already 60. But that does not mean that the role Hal Jordan plays in this story can't carry over to the DCU. Now, to understand Hal Jordan's role, we must understand the main villain of the New Frontier, and that main villain is none other than the Center. Now, in this story, the Center is described as an ancient sentient island that is so afraid of humanity because of their destructive capabilities that it decides that it has to eradicate humanity. This is also another thing I want you guys to keep in the back of your mind. The Center being afraid of humanity is very important, and you'll understand why it is in a few moments. Now, one of the abilities that the Center has is the ability to summon large dinosaurs or kaijus, and it's funny because we actually see a kaiju in the Superman trailer. Now, I'm not 100% saying that this kaiju is from the Center, but it is interesting that there's a kaiju in this movie and we don't know where it comes from. But another ability that the Center has is actually the ability to mind control others, and we actually see this take place in the New Frontier when the Center mind controls numerous villains and groups of people. In fact, it's actually showcased that the Center mind controlled a large group of people, turning them into a conspiracy-like cult. And on top of that, the New Frontier actually starts off with a random writer who's possessed by the Center actually killing himself after writing the words of the Center. Now, how does this tie into Lanterns? Again, we refer right back to the synopsis, in which is stated 2 intergalactic cops drawn into a dark Earth-based mystery as they investigate a murder in the American heartland. The same way the New Frontier starts off with a random murder. There's also 2 confirmed castings in Lanterns that tie into that conspiracy-like cult that I was talking about earlier. And those 2 castings are the castings of Garrett Dillahunt as William Macon and Kelly MacDonald as Sheriff Kerry. Now, Garrett Dillahunt's character is verbatim stated to be a conspiracy-minded man, and in the description for Sheriff Kerry, it's stated that her resilience, shaped by a complex past that's hardened her resolve, anchors her when the community's secrets start to surface. What are these secrets, and how does it tie into the entire community? Could this town or community be one that's been mind-controlled by the Center? I can't say for certain, but it sure seems like it's a possibility. Another interesting detail that adds to this theory is the fact that we just recently got confirmation that Sinestro will in fact be joining this series. Now, why is this significant? I know at face value it just seems like, well, okay, it's Sinestro, he's a Hal Jordan villain, they obviously need a villain for the show, that's why he's there. But it gets a little bit deeper than just that, and this is because as recent as New York Comic-Con, one of the writers of the show, Tom King, was asked if Parallax Hal would be making an appearance in this show because of the fact that obviously Hal Jordan's old as fuck, and the only time Hal Jordan ever looked that old in the comics was when Parallax was corrupting his spirit. When Tom King was asked this question, Tom King simply responded, "I can neither confirm or deny," which, if you ask me, is pretty fucking telling. If Parallax Hal Jordan really had nothing to do with the show, I see no reason as to why Tom King wouldn't have just said, no, we're not going to be doing anything with Parallax Hal. But the fact that he kind of left it up in the air makes me believe that there is a high possibility that we may see him. And it would also add a lot of context as to why Hal Jordan was casted as a 60-year-old and looks extremely old in this show. Now, do you guys remember earlier when I said the Center being afraid of humanity is going to be very important? What if in the DCU, the reason why the Center is sentient is because of Parallax, and Parallax has his influence on the Center, which is why it's so fearful of humanity in the first place? This would also explain why Sinestro, who is the founder of the Yellow Lantern Corps, would be in this Earth-based show anyway. And as for Hal Jordan, what if he really isn't 60 years old in universe? What if Hal Jordan just looks old because of the fact that Parallax has been breaking down his will for so long that it just severely aged him? And before you guys say, oh no, okay, you're reaching, that doesn't make any sense. In the comics, that's actually what happens. Hal Jordan was never old when Parallax took over his body, and this was explained to us in Green Lantern Rebirth when we find out that the reason why Hal Jordan looked so old when Parallax corrupted him is because of the fact that he was so stressed out from his will being broken down and being so fearful that it rapidly aged him. So during that point in time when Hal Jordan was walking around looking like he was 70, he was in fact in his mid-30s. And we know this is the case because Hal Jordan is a character who is consistently showcased as younger than Batman and Superman, and Batman at that time was only up to Tim Drake in terms of Robins, meaning that that Batman at this point in time was only like mid-30s, and that would put Hal Jordan right around the same age. Now, the reason why this would in theory save Hal Jordan in the DCU is because, for those of you who don't know, after the Parallax Hal Jordan arc, eventually later on in comics, Hal Jordan actually comes back to life in Green Lantern Rebirth. Now, in the comics, obviously he has his little tenure as the Spectre, and then it leads into him coming back to life, and I'm not sure that they're going to adapt that aspect of it into the DCU. But as we already know, adaptations don't copy and paste, so they could definitely figure out a creative way to bring back Hal Jordan in a Green Lantern Rebirth-esque fashion without having him as the Spectre. And if he is in fact Parallax Hal Jordan in Lanterns, he doesn't necessarily have to be defeated by John Stewart. The way he dies in comics is that he actually sacrifices himself against a Sun Eater, and in Lanterns they could have him sacrifice himself against the Center or whoever the big bad of that series is. Now, like I said, I don't know how they would go about resurrecting him, but if they do go the route of resurrecting Hal Jordan and bringing him back in his prime as a younger actor, this would then tie into the New Frontier theory that I had, because of the fact that in the New Frontier, Hal Jordan is crucial when it comes to defeating the Center, because he is the one who actually destroys the Center. And if they do this, not only will it restore the reputation of Hal Jordan, you also then secure the future of Lanterns in the DCU, because you can then adapt the emotional spectrum being introduced the same way it was introduced in Green Lantern Rebirth. And like I said earlier, John Stewart can continue to be the main Lantern on Earth with the Justice League, while Hal Jordan goes back with the Green Lantern Corps and continues to investigate the rest of the emotional spectrum off in space. So if you want to give him his own solo movies while John Stewart keeps Lanterns and keeps the Justice League appearances, you can do that. And that way both John Stewart and Hal Jordan fans are happy. Adapting Parallax Hal and Lanterns could also open the doorway to introducing Kyle Rayner, and he could maybe appear in maybe the season finale or in the later episodes. Now, like I said, guys, take this theory with a grain of salt. This is pure speculation. None of this could be true. I'm just basing it off of the evidence that we have gotten so far. But I really do think that this is a possibility. And even though James Gunn did in fact shoot down the idea that New Frontier would be written and directed by him, it doesn't mean that it won't be written and directed by someone else and still be adapted in the DCU. And as Gunn already stated, it is a massive influence for the DCU. So with that being said, I do think that it's very possible that we get the return of Hal Jordan in the DCU. And this is even more likely considering the fact that Kyle Chandler's only signed on for a 1-year deal, which means A, Hal Jordan is just cooked in the DCU and he's gonna die at the end of Lanterns, or B, Kyle Chandler just hasn't figured out a new deal that's going beyond that year, or C, a new actor will be cast as Hal Jordan and continue playing him later on in the DCU. Personally, I hope it's C, but any one of those is a possibility. But overall, guys, that is going to do it for my rant on Lanterns. If you think that the theory that I gave is possible, give this video a like, comment, tell me your thoughts, and be sure to subscribe to the channel. But also, if you guys want more videos like this where we discuss the DCU or even the MCU, let us know in the comments and we'll be sure to do that. But like I said, that's going to do it for this Yap session. Thank you guys for watching.